Hey everyone, welcome back to the Red Path. It's Dara here with you today, and in this video we have a tournament report of the Broadsword GT, which I attended with my world leaders. It's coming up next. Stay tuned. Okay, welcome back everyone. So, for those of you who don't know, I recently attended the Broadsword Grand Tournament in Mayo, Ireland, which is run by Broadsword Wargaming, a fairly prolific content creation group that you can catch them on various different social media platforms. Highly recommend checking them out. But they put on this fantastic event in Mayo in Ireland, which myself and a bunch of friends travels up the country for. And I brought my world leaders. So before we get into the games and the event itself, I'll run you quickly through the list that I brought. So I brought my beloved, now Demon Prince, Macro Lord, who is leading up the Cinder Host. So that is basically a Demon Prince with wings. He's got the Hellforged sword and the Mantle of Traders Warlord trait. He's also the Warlord of my army. As well, in the HQ slots, we have Kem Gregor, my Blood Priest, the Dark Apostle. And you guessed it, he has Illusory Supplication. Surprise, surprise. Moving on to the troops, we have Barney and his Cultist squad, so it's just a standard 10-man Cultist squad for action work. Then we have 2 5-man Berserker squads and 1 8-man Berserker squad. Each of these also has an icon, you will be unsurprised to hear. We then go into the meat of my army, which is the elites component. So in the elites, we start off with a squad of 8 possessed. Now the possessed I had to very hurriedly paint in the 5 days between them coming out and the tournament beginning. There's also a video on how I actually painted the possessed available on the Red Path, so if you haven't seen that already and want to know how I achieved those effects, check it out. But yeah, so the possessed were a really fun addition to my army. I was basically, in my playtests, I just realized how independent and fantastic they can be as this little death ball unit that just goes off and gets work done and can be incredibly annoying to deal with at toughness 5 and 3 wounds each. Following on from the possessed, we have the big fat 10-man Red Butcher Terminator squad with the Black Rune of Damnation. Shocker, I know. In this squad, 7 of the guys have cursed weapons and combi bolters. One has an accursed weapon and heavy flamer. One regular guy has a chain fist and combi bolter, and then the sergeant has a chain fist and combi bolter as well. Now the reason for this is that overall my list actually lacks more than 1 damage weapons. And then on a platform like the Red Butchers, they can actually really reliably go into a vehicle, and with 2 guys with chain fist, that vehicle is probably dead. So in playtest games, I really enjoyed how that kind of functioned, and obviously Red Butchers at a 10-man size can really carry a list very hard with all the buffs on them. Moving on from that, the heart and soul of the army, Gorgeous Mo himself, the Master of Executions, with a relic, no less, the Gorget of Eternal Hatred, which in a lot of ways is a good meme. However, it does give the Master of Executions a 2+ armor save and a 4+ invulnerable save, which is actually really good. And then you add to that the nice little effects that when he dies, he can explode and hurt enemies. Now, for those of you who know me, for those of you who hang out in our Discord, which if you don't already, join it, it's great fun. You know that I have had a passionate hatred for the Master of Executions. As a meme, I built one for a competition and I painted him and I was really happy with him. And I kind of fell in love with the idea of using a Master of Executions again. Then when the new book came out, I used him again as a joke, but very quickly realized that he's actually incredibly efficient and is a little mortal wound nuclear missile that you can throw at the enemy and actually reliably just kill things really well with him. So he kind of went from being a complete, like, whatever unit, like a complete joke, to being something that now I would almost say is an auto-include in my list, which is hilarious, I think, but we move on. Moving into the fast attack slot, we have 2 squads of 5 warp talents. Topical unit, I know, and I'll let you know my thoughts on them post-tournament as we kind of get through the video. but they were there essentially to jump into different quarters, potentially do some objective work, maybe tag units and prevent them from falling back. I wasn't thoroughly impressed with them in my playtest games, but I kept them in the list anyway for want of having something else to put in there that I actually preferred over them. It is also important to caveat that Forge World was not allowed at this event as the FAQ had not been released yet, but we'll get to that. Aside from that, we also have 6 Raptors, essentially a really good action monkey unit for retrieve Nephilim data that can jump in and just guarantee get one of the quarters for you. And also actually quite a killy unit if they make their charge in the following turns if they have managed to survive, because they actually have quite a high volume of attacks. At Strength 5, AP 1, it's nothing to be sniffed at. Then we go on to the dedicated transports, and in that section we have of course 2 humble rhinos. That rounds out the list that I brought to the Broadsword Grand Tournament. It's a nice tidy list, the idea being that I'll probably most of the time take Skulls for the Skull Throne, and the Demon Prince will try and snipe that objective for me. As well as that, a lot of the time we're going to take R&D, because you have it guaranteed with Cultists in your own quarter. The Warp Talons can early doors get one of the awkward quarters, the Raptors can get another one as well. I'll explain kind of how that works as we go through the games and stuff. And apart from that, I'm kind of relying on my opponent's army then to pick my 3rd secondary, defaulting to the Long War if I have to. So I will say going into this tournament, I was not actually happy with this list. It was not the list that I really wanted to be bringing, mainly because Forge World was not legal. The FAQ had not yet dropped, so because of the way the keywords worked, I wasn't able to bring my beloved drills. So I was very much funneled into picking the units in my collection I owned that were not made of resin, which was a limited number of units, unfortunately. And I had brought another list to the Leeds Grand Tournament a few weeks back, or Super Major even, which involved like Hellbrutes and stuff, but I just really didn't like that list as much, so we made some swaps around, and basically Hellbrutes came out, Warp Talents came in, Possessed came in. We moved around some things, and even then, in my playtest games, which I did fine with, you know, I played a lot of games leading up to this, getting used to the list, and I did reasonably well. I was sitting around a 60% win rate, but it just wasn't clicking for me, you know, the list was not perfect. Mantle of Traders doesn't actually have a lot of value units to bounce off of, because you've got 3 units in there that are Demonkin, so not core. There was some kind of synergies that just weren't really working for me, but I just didn't really have the time to, you know, come up with something fresh, come up with something new, and then put it into playtest action. But regardless, that's what we settled on, that's what we submitted. So next up, we're going to talk about the event, the lead up to it, the trip there, all that sort of stuff, and then we're going to dive into the games as well. So that's coming up next. Okay, so going up to the Broadsword GT was quite an adventure, as for those of you who don't know, Ireland has a really poor infrastructure system, so we basically had to drive there. So my buddy Dan, who was bringing his Tyranids, and a very, very competent competitive player, drove us up. So it was myself, Dan, my other buddy Jay, who was bringing his lovely Dark Eldar army as well. We also had another friend, Mike, coming up from Cork. So there was a nice little contingent from the city heading up to this event. So after quite a lengthy 3.5-hour drive through the back roads of Ireland and getting absolutely pounded on these terrible, terrible surfaces, we finally made it there pretty tired on the Friday evening kind of time. So what we did was we actually headed to the event that night. We met up with Ollie, who was running it, and we actually drew down and had a really fun Cork versus Dublin WTC pairing style thing going on with 2 teams of 4. I ended up playing Colin from Team Ireland that night, who was bringing his Craft World Eldar, which was a very interesting mixed Craft World, but we'll get to that later as I ended up meeting him during the tournament, and we'll talk about that then. But yeah, so I lost that game. I think it was like 86 to 60 something, I want to say. But you know, we were just kind of throwing dice around, having a fun time. We all went out and got pizza afterwards, so that was pretty fun. You know, good night's sleep then. Got ready for the tournament the next day, grabbed all the essentials, plenty of water, lots of fruit, protein bars, nuts, all that low release, releasing energy over time, which is very important in maintaining a consistent source of energy and ability to play 40k for a long day of games. But yeah, the tournament was 35 people in the end. There was a really interesting mix of lists that actually showed up, and I'll talk about that now before we get into the games. So there was quite a lot of knight players, mostly Imperial knights, which is a little bit against the grain of what we normally see. I think there was 4 Imperials and 1 Chaos Knight. There was quite a few Tyranid lists, unsurprisingly. There was actually a lot of Craftworld Eldar floating around as well, which Ireland has a big love affair for elves of every kind, so it wasn't really surprising to see too many of them showing up. There was 5 Chaos Space Marine lists. There was an Emperor's Children, there was an Iron Warriors, there was another Emperor's Children, there was myself playing the World Leaders, and I think that was it actually. So yeah, maybe there was just 4. There was a Thousand Suns player, Mike, my good friend, who was bringing Magnus and his Mutilate Vortex Beast, which hilarious. And yeah, there was a smattering of Space Marines, as you would expect. So, funny enough, no Tau, and also no Sisters of Battle. Now, as far as I'm aware, I don't know if anyone in Ireland actually has a Sisters of Battle army that is a competitive player, but that's whatever. No Tau was quite surprising to me. So, it was an interesting field going into it, and the matchups went up on Friday, and I was playing Chaos Knights for my first game. So we're going to talk about that. That's going to be coming up. Okay, so game 1 against the Chaos Knights. Now, on the Friday when the matchups went up, I immediately saw this army list and began panicking because I had not played Chaos Knights yet. And everyone I knew who was a World Leaders player and had played them said they were actually quite a challenging army to come up against, mainly because of dread tests having charge ranges, which really freaked me out. Now this list was pretty cool. It was a Knight Abominant with all the bells and whistles. I cannot remember exactly everything that was on this knight because there was like a paragraph of text on the Battlescribe file. He had relics, warlord traits, and other weird Chaos Knight stuff, which basically equated to an Abominant that was almost impossible to kill. I think it was no rerolls to wound, no rerolls to hit. He couldn't reroll damage. He had feel no pains. He had a whole bunch of stuff that was basically quite intimidating. There was also a Knight Diabolus who had the Veil of Medrengard. This whole list is House Herpetrex as well, by the way. So that guy was pretty scary too. And then there was 7 War Dogs of varying types. So quite a few Brigands with the Chain Cannon and Melt-A-Spear. There was a couple of guys with the Slaughter Claw and Melt-A-Gun. I think they're called Stalkers. And there was an Executioner as well, the War Dog Helvern. So quite an interesting mix, and I sent this list to Jamie and Jack beforehand, and I was like, guys, like, what do I do against Knights? And basically their advice was, whatever you do, don't go after the Abominant, and try and kill the War Dogs, which I was like, fair enough, that makes a lot of sense. So I rock up to the table, my opponent Shane, really lovely guy, like, can't say enough about how amazing this game was, all thanks to Shane just being an absolute gent and us having a fantastic, really fun game throughout. His army was gorgeous as well, by the way. It was painted like the box art for the new Abominant. His whole list was that lovely black and kind of oxidized color. And he also had a gorgeous display board, like this ruined Imperial city with all these blood ravens impaled on spikes and stuff. It was phenomenal. Anyway, we rock up. We exchange pleasantries, all the usual pre-game amble at a tournament. I explain what my list does about the pre-game moves, he explains what his list does. His buddy is there as well, and they're both basically telling me that in every game the Abominant just does not die. You know, don't go for it, it's a trap if you try and go for it, blah blah blah, all this stuff. And I'm like, yeah, you know what, that sounds pretty tough. So we get into deployment, and he puts down the Abominant first. Now we were playing, I can't remember the mission name, it's one of the ones where the deployment is the circle in the middle and you've got your table quarters. Anyway, and I actually take for the Dark Gods in this one, basically the God Rod, as we call it, because I'm kind of like, if I can buff my leadership up in certain quarters, that'll actually help counteract the dread tests. As well as that, I take the Long War and I take Bring It Down just because it's a better pick than Skulls in this list. So we get to deployment, like I'm saying, and he puts down the Abominant front and center, right on the edge of the circle, basically as a massive bait. And in my head, I can just hear Jamie on one side and Jack on the other saying, whatever you do, Dara, don't go for that. Don't go for that knight, go for the Helverins. And I'm nodding to myself thinking, yeah, they're right. So I decide to go for the Abominants, and I frontline a Rhino. I frontline my Demon Prince, and I frontline my big Possessed brick. Inside the Rhino there's the 8-man Berserker squad and the Master of Executions. And I say, screw the advice. I'm going to kill this guy. So turn 1 begins. I go first. I frenzy the possessed forward. I hop everyone out of the rhino, drive the rhino forward, and I hop my demon prince forward. So what ends up happening is that I send the brick of possessed, my demon prince, the 8-man berserker squad, and a rhino in. Unfortunately, Gorgeous Mo with massive executions fails his charge. Devastating. So he pops a stratagem to reduce damage on the big knight, and I think, well shit, I've made a terrible mistake. However, I kill the knight. Just. My demon prince, Macrolore, is the last to swing, and with his blade, the Angel Slayer blade, he brings down the knight Abominant, which is monumental for a couple of reasons. He's basically lost everything that stacks on top of this guy, like all the relics, warlord traits, etc, that he's paid to give this guy. He's lost a huge chunk of his army in that. But, crucially, this is the mission where you do not regain CP if your warlord is dead. And his warlord was now dead, which meant he was only on 1 CP for the rest of the game. Now, he did have an ability, I think it was a relic, to 5-up regain CP when I spent stratagem, so he did get a couple back over the game from that. But regardless, it really set the tone when I made this proper, like, alpha play of just, like, run out. If I kill this guy, fantastic. If I don't kill this guy, I probably lose the game. But I did kill him, and it was huge. And basically what ended up happening was I kind of consolidated forward with the possessed to block a lot of his deployment zone. So pretty much all of his armigers were stuck for the first turn where they were standing. Now in his first turn he hits back pretty hard with all those guys. Basically I lose everything there except for a couple of possessed and my demon prince. I lose all the berserkers. The Knight Diabolus walks around and just beats the crap out of all of them with his laser destructor and in combat. And the 2 possessed actually end up running to morale at the end of the turn. So I'm kind of thinking like, maybe that wasn't the best trade, but what I've managed to do is kite him inside his whole deployment for a full turn. And because of where I've spread out, I have a squad of warp talents in the bottom right corner. They've just finished for the Dark God, so I'm buffed up leadership there. And I have the other squad up on the top corner where they're going to do it in the next turn. So that's great. Basically, what happens from there is that my Red Butchers manage to get into him over the next couple of turns and just completely kite him inside his own deployment again, while they just continuously attack, tear down a couple of war dogs every turn, making sure that no one is coming out of their deployment zone, making sure that I'm maxing my primary objective every single turn, which is just so crippling for him. Like, he puts out a lot of damage. By the end of the game, I literally have like a couple of Terminators and my cultists left. Everything else is dead, but it doesn't matter at that point because I have just kept him in for so long. He has like 2 armigers left on the board. It's a bloodbath of a game. The highlight at one point is the Knight Diabolus running into the center where my Dark Bossil has just stood there after he's clapped the Red Butchers off and said, "On your way, boys." And the Knight Diabolus fires his laser destructor into the Apostle, and the 2 Dark Disciples take both the shots, leaving him alive. Hilariously, he does not kill him in combat either then. I just keep making my invulnerable saves, and it's just ridiculous, but whatever. The game finishes with me just keeping him completely inside his deployment zone. For the Dark Gods has actually gone off in every quarter as well. I've managed to sneak my Raptor squad into his one to get that done there. And it was a pretty big victory for me. It was 88 to 36, and that ended game 1. So I was feeling pretty good after that. You know, the list was functioning quite well, pretty much by the numbers in a lot of ways. Red Butchers just doing a phenomenal amount of work, and their reputation went ahead of them for the rest of the games. There's people going around asking me, "Oh, you're the guy with that really scary Terminator unit." I'm like, yeah, they're really insane. Like, for example, the Red Butcher unit did 27 damage to the Knight Diabolus with just the chain fists over a couple of activations. Ridiculous behavior. Like, they just shouldn't be doing that kind of stuff, but they just do, you know? It's really, really good. Anyway, very strong game, and going into game 2, I see that I'm facing Custodes, one of my hated foes. So we're going to talk about that one. That's coming up next. So game 2 is into Custodes and Sean, who is another lovely opponent. He's bringing the Emperor's Chosen, and it's kind of Custodes good stuff. At this point, I'm kind of like, I play Custodes at every tournament, is what it kind of seems to run down to, and it always feels somewhat the same. So he's bringing the Emperor's Chosen, he's got Trajan, He's got the guy with the banner, he's got Mr. Worldstar, the Dawn Eagle jet bike captain, he's got a bunch of guys with swords and shields, or spears and shields, I can't remember. He has 2 Terminator bricks, which is quite scary actually. He has a Telemon Dreadnought, 2 squads of sisters, and I think it was the Caladius Assassin, or maybe Calexis, the Anti-Psyker one anyway. So lots of good stuff going on there. And I kind of know how it's going to function. It's going to dep all into the middle. The Telemon is going to run out somewhere and be annoying. And so is the Dawn Eagle jet bike captain. So what basically ends up happening in this game, so I actually take for the Dark Gods again, because I was kind of encouraged by how I did in the first game. I believe I go first again, and it was another quarters mission. So basically what I did is I jumped the squad of Warp Talons into the quarters, started to for the... I actually thought about doing for the Dark Gods, and then I decided against it because he had pushed out his sister squad quite far down there. So I was like, I'll actually try and snipe them off of it. So I did for the Dark Gods up top. Basically, the guys traded out with the sister squad. A Custodian squad came down, kind of dealt with the Warp Talons, as did the Telemon. So that quarter at the bottom was looking quite scary with a Custodian squad and a Telemon down there. And basically what we had was a Mexican standoff in the middle of the board where my massive brick of death was behind one of the L's in the middle, and his massive brick of death was behind the other, and it was a question of who would break first. So what he does is he actually sends a Dawn Eagle jet bike captain and a squad of custodians up to the top, where I have a Rhino full of berserkers and the other Warp Talon squad. Now, the custodian, the Dawn Eagle jet bike captain, goes in, kills a couple of Warp Talons with shooting and goes into the Rhino, and it does not kill it, which is quite important. The Custodian guys, they actually fail their charge as well. I pile out my Berserkers, which was the 8-man squad, and the Possessed come up as well. The Warp Talons jump over to deal with those Custodians, and the Possessed and the Berserkers go into the Dawn Eagle jet bike captain. They take him, although I do lose a bunch of Berserkers on the interrupt. I think I end up with only 3 left or something like that. But they rip down the Dawn Eagle jet bike guy, which is pretty big, because I spend the 6-inch consolidate stratagem to move the Possessed back into the center, into a nice threatening position, which is kind of what ends up breaking the Mexican standoff, as we'll see. So he spends another turn kind of mopping up the bottom quarter with the Telemon and the Custodians, and I've just kind of decided that I'm giving up on that quarter down there. It's just not my problem anymore. But he kind of puts out some guys into the Possessed, and it just doesn't really do enough. And then in my turn, what I do is I launch out the Red Butchers, and I launch out my Demon Prince as well. So I just decide, screw it, we're going all in now. And basically, they go charging up, the Possessed fight on, and what ends up happening over several turns of quite a big deadlock over the central objective is the Red Butchers just every single turn are going through 1 or 2 squads or a character or something like that. What I've also done in this point, it was very cheeky, the Master of Executions has snuck around to the back to the banner guy who was my Skulls for the Skull Throne target, and he just runs in and he just takes his head, no problem. 3 6s, 6 mortal wounds, goodbye, God bless, you're done. So that gets me 10 points, which is pretty big. And then in the center, there's just this crazy fight going on, and I'm slowly pushing him back every turn. I'm pushing him further and further out of the center. Trajan is like there, he's making loads of Feel No Pains, doing awesome things as well. My Demon Prince he goes into the Emperor's, the Blade Champion, and he cannot kill the Blade Champion and then gets killed back by him, and it's just so cool. There's so many epic moments going on. But eventually the war of attrition wins out on my side, and I'm able to just completely mop him up. He has the Telemon still roaming around, but at that point, that's all he's got. It doesn't matter anymore. A Raptor squad goes running up and mows through the sister squad in his backfield in turn 4 to do for the Dark Gods in his backfield in turn 5, clenching me the win. So the game ends another big victory. It was like 86 to 42, I want to say. And again, I'm pretty happy with the list. The Red Butchers carrying the day for me in a big way. The Possessed making a really important breakthrough on one flank as well. Awesome stuff altogether. So, you know, 2-0 at this point. I'm kind of scared because I'm really rocketing high up on the tables now, and I'm going to be going into someone else who's also gone 2-0 next. And I see that I'm facing the Emperor's Children. And I think to myself, it's time for vengeance for Skalatrax. It's that game is coming up next. So, game 3 of the Broadsword GT, I am looking for vengeance for Scalathrax, and I am playing Francesco and his gorgeous Emperor's Children army. Unfortunately, I stopped taking pictures in the tournament at this point. My phone was low on battery, I was very tired, I just wanted to focus on the game. But he had a gorgeous converted army. It was, like, words cannot do it justice. It was just so beautiful to look at. And it was a really scary list. So he had a Demon Prince with, I think it was the Intoxicating Elixir. He had a Dark Apostle. He had a Master of Possession in his HQs. Some Cultists and all the Noise Marines in the world as well, which I now respect so much after having gone up against them. He had a big, scary Terminator brick as well, full of all the good stuff. And of course, Abaddon the Despoiler, which was terrifying to me. There was probably a couple of other things on the list again. My memory escapes me exactly what was in it, but you know, we looked at each other and we were like, okay, I see your Terminator brick and I raise you my Terminator brick and we'll see what happens. So basically, this game is a really interesting one. I take Skulls again because, and I pick his Master of Possession as the target because I kind of feel he's probably going to have to keep moving up with that guy. And I also take Retrieve Nephilim data, and I think I took the Long War in this one as well. So, no, sorry, I take No Prisoners, because he had the same amount of No Prisoners points as me. So again, we have this really interesting Mexican standoff in the two L's in the middle of the board, where we're basically like, whose Terminator brick is going to break first? Meanwhile, on the flanks, there's all this small unit exchanges happening. So my Warp Talons are fighting as Noise Marines. Generally speaking, the Noise Marines are winning out in these fights, and I'm taking an absolute battering in the first 2 turns. I lose quite a few key assets. He does a really cool fight on Death Strat with the Noise Marine squads, which all have Power Fist champions, which still hit on 3s because they ignore those modifiers. And that was really scary. He just battered one of my squads that killed one of his. So there's really interesting MSU trades happening on the flanks throughout the first couple of turns, which is where the game is really focused on at the minute. And again, that's kind of where the turning point is. Abaddon's kind of walking around being quite menacing as well, and the Terminator squad is all buffed up in the middle. The break happens in turn 3, where he launches his Demon Prince out to counter one of my 5-man Berserker squads, who has just killed one of his Noise Marine squads and then consolidated into the middle as a bait. So the Demon Prince goes in and minces the Berserkers. Surprise, surprise. And I say, right, time for the play, and I launch my Butchers out, as well as my Possessed, all into his Demon Prince. I did not know that the Emperor's Children have an ability to only take 3 damage per phase on a character. I think it was a relic or a stratagem, I can't remember. But that was a moment that I realized that maybe I had made a grievous mistake. However, the Demon Prince only killed 1 Red Butcher back on the slapback because of all the buffs I'd layered on them. But I knew that in the next turn, I was going to take a pounding from his Terminator line. And they went in, and I lost 2 more Red Butchers. And then I killed back 6 of his Terminators. And then I was kind of like, oh yeah, the Red Butchers are just better than all the other Chaos Terminators. It doesn't matter what Legion you bring. They're going to kill you, and they're going to kill you twice. So basically what ends up happening is it's like a feed war at this point, where we feed our powerful units into the middle turn after turn, but he cannot break the Red Butchers. His Demon Prince goes down, his Terminators go down. I'm really worried about Abaddon, so what I do is a big distraction play where I send my 8-man Berserker squad off into a Noise Marine squad to clear them up and take an objective, to try and pull Abaddon away from the center, which, to my advantage, he does bring Abaddon over there, which is awesome because I'm like, now I don't have to deal with him. And Abaddon does clear up the Berserkers, but it means he's out of the fight and he can't hurt the Red Butchers, which then just mow through the rest of his main lines. The Master of Executions sneaks around again and just takes the head of the Master of Possession. Just like that, walks in, mortal wounds, goodbye, you're done. 10 points for me, no problem. By this point, I have just controlled the primary for too long, and I racked up quite a high secondary score as well. He doesn't really have much left. Towards the latter half of the game, all that's on his side is Abaddon and the 10-man Cultist squad, which do just get mopped up by my Raptors that come in eventually. He realizes too late that the play would have been to introduce Abaddon into the center, because Abaddon will just kill the Red Butchers with mortal wounds with high damage over several turns because they can't kill him back. And he says this to me afterwards, that that was his mistake. And I tried to bait Abaddon away with that move with the Berserkers, which really paid off in my favor. So it's another big win for me. It's 86 to 37. And at the end of day one, I'm in first place in the tournament, which is not good. I don't want to be up this high. But that's how game one ends. And I see that, or sorry, game three ends, and I see that I'm facing Dan, my good friend, on day two with his Tyranids. So that game's coming up next. Okay, so we move on to day two of the Broadsword GT after a night of drinks and food and fun and friendship. Lots of laughs were had. A lot of smack talk between me and Dan over the big table as well. Just, you know, telling each other that we are going to absolutely crush the other person. However, Dan knows that he is going to crush me, and I know that I'm going to lose terribly because we were playing Dara Salvage, and we played this game as a practice literally not even a week before, and I got hockeyed badly. His list is just very good, and my list doesn't really have many answers to it. So he's bringing Kraken nids, not Leviathan. He has all the Raveners in the world. He has the Reaper Flyrant. He has a Neurothrope and 2 Parasites Mortrex. And he has a Biovore, 2 squads of Pyrovores, a Tyrannocyte, and 2 Harpies. So I know straight away that this game is going to go badly. But I can still contest it. I'm probably never winning, but I can get a good few points out of it regardless, because Data Scry is good for the World Eaters. However, I end up going first, which is fine, but I roll a 1 on my Illusory Supplication Prayer, which is definitely not fine. Now, me and Dan play pretty regularly, and we like to have really fun, competitive, close games, where we have a laugh, but it's still a very competitive game. When I roll this 1 on the prayer, we both just look at each other and we know the game is already over, because it means he is able to lift pretty much my entire Red Butcher squad in 1 turn quite easily. So we both kind of get a bit bummed out by this, because we wanted a really fun game, and it's not really going to be that anymore. So what happens is he flies both the Harpies over the squad, bombs them, picks up 2, and then basically rinses another 6 with shooting. So I'm down to 2 Red Butchers. One of them runs to morale, because sure. And some big chunks have been taken out of my army. And at this point, I'm kind of like, I'm really clawing for whatever points I can get here. And I do claw. Some fun things happen during the game, like my Master of Executions goes through both the Parasites and Mortrex, which is pretty hilarious. He's infected at one point with the Ovipositor, and he's got like 2 wounds left. Takes the D3 at the start of the turn, just takes 1, so he lives. But I made a little misplay in the bottom quarter with some of my Berserkers down there as well. Basically, at one key moment, I forgot to select them as the first unit to fight in ongoing combat into a Ravener squad, which I definitely should have done. I picked like Warp Talons that were going into a Harpy instead, which was completely pointless. And basically what happened was that the entire Berserk squad got picked up, which completely lost me that quarter of the board, which was actually devastating on the points. That really swung an awful lot in his favor. Up on the top half of the board was basically the Possessed. They cleared out a Ravener squad, which was nice, and they kind of motored on towards the back lines, but every single turn I had the Flyrant jumping out, killing a squad, using Overrun to jump back, which, in my opinion, is not how the stratagem should work, but it is how it works, and it's just really silly, but that's where we are. Meanwhile, the surviving Red Butcher charges and kills like a bunch of Pyrovores by himself, and because the Tyrannocyte has come in and just flamed a load of stuff as well with the Pyrovore bombs, killed all my cultists off the home objective. There's a bit of a conflict happening in my own deployment zone, where some both my Warp Talon squads actually came in my own deployment zone and kind of had an ongoing fight there until eventually they lost out, but they took a good few guys with them as well. In this game as well, I took no prisoners, I took the Long War, and I took Assassinate just because he had so many characters. I take the Flyrant down to 1 wound with the with a Berserker squad. At one point, he lives, kills all the Berserkers back, because of course he does, it's the Reaper of Obliterax. My Demon Prince cleans out a warrior squad, but then in the next turn is killed by the Flyrant, who actually regenerates wounds which is a good thing because he parried in the psychic phase and took a wound, so it would have killed him if he didn't regen. But yeah, basically I get tabled by turn 4 and it's ugly. I think the score was like 88 to 32 on Dan's favor. And unfortunately that's just how it goes. Sometimes when the prayer doesn't go off, it can just be quite devastating. So that was really sucky, but you know, I flew way too close to the sun. I was Icarus after day 1, and it turned out the sun was made of Tyranids. And then I see that in game 5, I'm playing Colin's Eldar, Colin, who I had played on the Friday night, and I was not happy about that, but we're going to talk about that game. That's coming up next. So game 5 comes round, and I see that... Okay, before I explain about that, essentially a really weird thing happened with the pairings on day 2. One of the people who was 3-0 did not show up on day 2. Very, very strange. I don't know why you would drop if you're 3-0, but it happened. And it made the pairings really, really messed up because there was an uneven number of people who had gone 4-0 after game 4 and people who had gone 3-1. And basically what it meant was one of the 4-0 players was going to have to play one of the 3-1 players. And it was always going to be me who played the 4-0 player because I was the top of the 3-1 player pool. And basically because it was... random was the final criteria of the pairings. When we rolled up the pairings, it ended up that I would have been playing Dan again. And because it was ETC, WTC format, you can't have two people who are, or you can't have someone who is 4-0 play the same person again at any point in the last couple of rounds. So that had to be redone, and it got really, really complicated and messy. At one point I was supposed to be playing Knights, but how it ended up anyway was that I was playing Colin's Eldar, which is a really, really nasty Eldar list. It's a custom craft world. I forget the exact attributes, but basically it was Farseer on foot, Farseer on bike, 2 Warlocks, Warlock on bike, Baharoth, Karandras, a bunch of different aspect shrines. He had Banshees, Warp Spiders, 10 Hawks, 5 Hawks, Scorpions, and then he had some D-Cannons as well, and... think that was more or less... Oh, there was a bunch of Vipers flying around as well, which was amusing. So, going into this game, because we'd played on Friday, I knew that I was probably also losing this game because I found out that Swooping Hawks are the most uninteractive unit in the game and are really just not enjoyable at all to play against. Because essentially what they can do, because WGC have these really interesting is a word for it, stupid is another word, massive buildings that are like 4 stories high, all the windows are obscured, and the entire building is obscuring. So what that basically means is that you can stack loads of units inside this building and they can never be shot. Normally there would be windows on the 2nd, 3rd and 4th floors, but for some reason there just isn't. Which is amazing if you play Swooping Hawks, because you can just jump out every turn, shoot and bomb someone, and then use your unique battle focus ability to just redeploy back inside the building. So that's not great for me, because it means that there's two uninteractive units that I just can't really deal with at all, which kind of sucks. Then Baharoth is also a pain, as is Karandras, because they're both Phoenix Lords, so you can only take 3 wounds per phase, which means that because it's like a War Leader's army, which is basically only combat, you can't really take them out very easily, which is another big challenge. The D-Cannons are also actually really scary because the high damage on them and the fact that they're blast means my Red Butchers are kind of like, ooh, that's pretty nasty. Then you have all these like nice auxiliary units like the Vipers and the Banshees and the Warp Spiders. Warp Spiders are really cheeky as well because they can just run away from you when you declare a charge on them. There's loads of things that I find annoying in this list. There's some Rangers as well to do action stuff. Anyway, regardless. So the game begins and he goes first. Actually puts Karandras and Baharoth into my lines, picks up some stuff. It's not really that important. And I have ground them down, so I'm like, cool, all I have to do is kill both of those Phoenix Lords and the Ranger Squad in the middle, and then I get grounded down for this turn. So I have one hero, Warp Talon Sergeant, who's alive, and he runs at the Rangers and destroys them in combat, which is awesome. My Terminators shoot at Baharoth, take 2 wounds off him, which I now know means I can't get ground them down because I can't kill Baharoth. And up top, we take 3 wounds off Karandras with shooting from a bunch of different units. There's like Raptors, Rhinos, whatever going into him. Anyway, my Master of Executions runs down, takes 3 wounds off Baharoth. Baharoth says, fine, I'll hit you back and fly away. And he does, because he can do that. And Crandris dies and comes back to life, because Aspect Warriors can do that. Oh no, sorry, he actually didn't die. No, he lived on a wound. He resurrected in the later turn. But basically, straight from the get-go, this one play that I wanted to make to get some points hasn't really worked, and I'm kind of like, oh, this sucks. So over the next couple of turns, I very, very slowly move my army into the middle of the board and get shot to bits kind of each turn. Like, there's a lot of shooting coming in, there's some trades happening in the middle. I lose all my possess pretty early due to the D-cannons just blasting them, which kind of sucks. Then there's one turn where there is hope. Or at least I think there is hope. He's put a Banshee squad forward, and I see that, oh yeah, I lost like 4 Berserkers in a Rhino explosion at one point as well, which also sucked. But I see that I can charge this Banshee squad with the Berserkers and then charge them with the Red Butchers. And all I have to do is kill them with the Berserkers, and I can do the massive slingshot with the Red Butchers with a 6-inch consolidate, blah, blah, blah. So I'm thinking to myself, that could be huge, because I can actually get the Red Butchers to touch so many units in the next turn, which would lock down so many different things. All I have to do is make sure that the prayer goes off. And it doesn't go off. I roll a 1, and I'm just like, okay, cool, I guess. Why do these things happen? Anyway, I still do the slingshot move, and I bad touch like half his army, which is cool. I didn't know that the Hawks could fall back and still shoot with a stratagem, which also kind of sucks. They can't bomb, but they can still shoot. Anyway, we're kind of going into turn 4 now, and I really don't have a whole lot left, just a couple of Berserkers. My Demon Prince, who's just chasing some Scorpions on the top of the board out of pure spite at that point. He's killed Karandras as well. He's just like going for it. My Master of Executions, who went down to my own bottom quarter to hurt Baharoth, is just stranded and dies to like Warp Spiders on his home objective. I have a Rhino just ramming some 5 Warp Spiders every turn as well, because I'm just really spiteful at this point and I just want to hurt these guys. But the Butchers get picked up through the D-cannons being able to hit them on their normal profile, and each D-cannon shot going through just picking one up, which really sucks. The Hawks shoot them a bunch as well. And I think I have like 1 or 2 guys left, which the Banshee Exarch, who somehow has 10 attacks alone, comes in and just claims the last couple. And at that point, it's pretty much game over for me. And I'm not going to lie, it was not that fun of a game. Like, we knew it was not going to be that interesting. We both kind of rocked up to the board, and Colin just said to me, like, this is going to be boring for both of us, but more boring for you. And it was pretty boring, to be honest. So day 2 was actually pretty rough for me, in all honesty. I didn't feel great after it. I went into 2 armies that were very, very hard counters to my army, and there just wasn't a whole lot I could do about it when the prayer didn't go off in the really important turns in either game, which just really sucks. You know, sometimes all you have to do is roll a 2, but you roll a 1, and that's just how the dice go. But I think regardless, I was still losing both of those games. It wasn't like because of the prayers why I lost. That wasn't it at all. Both of these players are exceptionally good 40k players. Like Dan finished 2nd, Colin finished 4th. Like, they were always going to beat me. They were always going to outplay me. I just wanted the score to be closer, and I wanted it to be a more competitive game than what it was. It was just a kind of classic 8th edition whitewash almost. Like, very by the numbers for my opponents. But yeah, so that finished game 5. Now, we will wrap up and summarize everything that happened at the end of the tournament. That's coming up next. So, the second day has ended and I finished 3-2. I actually managed to place 7th overall due to the high wins that I got and the losses I took to being very good players, obviously. My buddy Mike with his 1000 Suns and his beautiful Mutilated Vortex Beast end up finishing 3rd. Dan comes in 2nd. So we take quite a lot of the top 10, us humble boys from Cork, which is an awesome feeling. And I was really happy for the guys. I guess I was like less happy with my, like, going into this tournament, all I wanted to do was go 3-2, and I did. But when I flew really close to the sun after day 1, I wanted the sun. I was like, I want this 4-1, I want this 5-0, which was stupid. I was never going to get that. You know, I was always going to get outplayed by these really good players on the top, and that's just how it is. But I was greedy, to be honest. And yeah, I was a little bit bummed out after the 2 rough games on day 2. But, you know, I was still happy with the 7th place overall. It was actually my highest placing ever at a tournament. So, you know, that was cool and something to take away from that. I also won Best Painted, which was awesome. Got a really nice framed kind of picture thing, some cool art, and I got one of the Katakan Colonel models as well, which was awesome. So that ended the tournament. Loads of good laughs, lots of good fun, great opponents all round, and you know, upon reflection, there's a lot that I would change about the list, especially now that the Forge World FAQ has come out. Number one being, Warp Talons are garbage. I don't know why. You know, it's 140 points for 5. They're just so bad. Not once in the tournament did their no fallback thing come up. They just don't really kill that much, not being core, only being AP2 as well, and Strength 4 is actually kind of pathetic when a lot of my army can easily get to Strength 5. So they went out, like, straight away. Immediately they were gone. And I've been moving around some other things. I wasn't hugely impressed with my Demon Prince in this tournament, and I hadn't been massively impressed with him in Leeds either, so I'm considering dropping him. The points that I got for Skulls for the Skull Throne were actually claimed by the Master of Executions in these games, as the Demon Prince did not have so many angles to jump in and do his surgical strikes. So I'm kind of thinking that maybe he comes out, and possibly Khorne the Betrayer actually comes in, but that is very much a work in progress mindset. Now that the Forge World FAQ is out, you better believe your boy is bringing back the drills, and they're coming back in a big, big way. So there's been some restructuring of the list facing into the Coventry Super Major, which is coming up for me in November. And we'll probably talk about that in another video closer to the time, once I've gotten a lot more playtesting in, how the list is going to alter and change. But overall, it was a really, really well-run event. So shout out to Ollie and Kira for putting it on. It was phenomenally fun. Can't wait for the next one. That was incredible. And yeah, 3-2, 7th place overall. So to be honest, pretty happy with how I did, given that the list wasn't one that I really wanted to bring. But yeah, that was kind of how we finished up. So I hope you folks found this tournament report interesting. It was certainly really fun to be there and just get back to seeing some old friends and have some laughs. We're going to have more tournament reports coming up, as a few of us head to the Coventry GT later this year, and it won't be too long before the LVO hits us. But until then, and until the next video, stay frosty, folks. Let's build.